erode and infect the facial nerve, the seventh cranial nerve, which runs in the middle ear. So I just wanted to make sure the patient doesn't have a canal cachotoma. They don't. So this is their right ear, and this is far narrower. This is far more tricky. So the patient's head was not only tilted forwards, downwards, but it was also tilted slightly to the right. So I'm kind of having to look upwards in this case, and it was quite tricky at times to kind of get the skin out. And because of the narrow ear, it's very little wriggle room with the instrument. I'm trying to pull the skin away from the canal wall, but when I'm going away, so in this instance the skin is on the left hand side of the ear canal, as I'm trying to almost drag the skin to the right, more to the midline, you've got to be careful, because if you overdo it, the fine end suction probe will bounce up against the right hand side of the ear canal, being comfortable for the patient. From the cartilage portion it's fine, but we're now on the bony part, so you'll be very gentle. So again, I'm trying to remove as much skin for the patient as I can, because the skin is unfortunately just not going to migrate on its own for the patient. And this ear was severely retracted. Now, it was so retracted that the back part of the eardrum, the posterior section of the eardrum, had been pulled in so much that it had wrapped itself around the hammer bone, the malleus, and when it did so, it constricted all the blood vessels supplying blood and nutrients to the hammer bone, which has then caused the hammer bone to erode, especially the short process. The short process is the top part of the hammer bone. So you can see the patient just moved there. We're peeling the skin. It's slightly uncomfortable. I think it happens a couple more occasions as well. So the short process is at the top part of the hammer bone, and it somewhat protrudes outwards of the eardrum itself. So when the eardrum gets sucked in, that's a very prominent part of the hammer bone that the eardrum wraps itself around. So it squashes the blood vessels, it constricts them, and the blood can no longer supply oxygen and much needed nutrients to the bones. The bone can start necrosing, can start diseasing and eroding away. In addition, the eardrum had got so sucked in that it wrapped itself around the long process of the incus. So the incus is the middle bone, also known as the anvil, and it had wrapped itself around that, and similarly it had strangled the blood vessels, it constricted them, so the incus eroded. So this eardrum, and you will see it, it's wrapped itself around the head of the stapes. So the stapes is the smallest bone in the body. It's the third middle ear bone, the last of the three, and that's connected to the incus. But the incus is no longer visibly there. So at the juncture, the incostapedal joint, where the incus would join with the head of with the stapes, we call that the region the head of the stapes. The head of the stapes is now visible because the eardrum sucked right around it. And in addition, this patient has got erosion of the top part of the ear canal near the eardrum. We call that the scutum area. So because the eardrum's been sucked in, that piece of bone, it's almost like an overhanging piece of bone at the top of the ear canal. As I said, it's called the scutum. The blood vessels there have become constricted, and that's resulted in the bone, the scutum, to have died and eroded, which has left the patient with a widening, a big vacant area at the top part of the eardrum. We call that an autoatecotomy. Sometimes if a patient's got a cholesteatoma, that's the region where the cholesteatoma forms. So that's the head of the stapes bone I was referring to. So the eardrum's sucked right in, it's wrapped itself around that. And I'm just angling the endoscope upwards.